Some stories don't begin with love, they begin with silence. This one began in a classroom that always smelled faintly of chalk and dust, where the ceiling fans turned slowly and time felt like it had nowhere urgent to go. That's where I met Miya. She sat by the window, not because she wanted to look outside, but because it felt easier to breathe there. Miya had a way of making herself small, not invisible, just quiet enough that the world didn't ask too much from her. She listened more than she spoke, and when she did speak, her voice always sounded like she was apologizing for existing. Back then, we were just teenagers, too young to understand what love really was, but old enough to feel it press against our chests without warning. Miya never called it love at first. She called it something warm, something she felt whenever a certain boy walked into the room. His name was Evan. Evan entered spaces like he belonged in them. Laughter followed him easily. Teachers remembered him. Friends gathered around him without effort. And Miya noticed him the way quiet people notice things, slowly, carefully, completely. She remembered the way his hair fell into his eyes when he was tired, the way he tapped his pen when he was thinking, the way his smile changed depending on who he was talking to. She never stared. She never lingered too long. She observed him the way you observe something fragile, afraid that if you look too closely, it might disappear. Their seats were close, but not touching. Close enough that Miya could hear him breathe when the room was quiet. Close enough that she could smell soap on his uniform after gym class. She never spoke to him unless he spoke first. And sometimes he did. Do you have a pen? Can I see your notes? Did the teacher say this was due today? Every question felt like a gift she didn't deserve. She answered calmly, politely, as if her heart wasn't racing fast enough to betray her. At home, she replayed those moments over and over again, not imagining confessions, not imagining kisses, just imagining his voice saying her name. Miya once told me something I never forgot. She said, "When you love quietly, you don't imagine a future, you imagine moments." She didn't want him to love her back. She just wanted him to be happy. And in her mind, those were two very different things.
High school has a way of stretching time. Days felt long, years felt short. Miya watched Evan grow taller, watched his voice change, watched him become more confident, more visible, and she stayed the same, still by the window, still quiet, still loving in ways no one noticed. She learned his schedule without trying, which classes he skipped, which days he stayed late. She knew when he was sad, even when he smiled, and she knew when he was falling for someone else, long before anyone said it out loud. But that came later. For now, love was still soft, still untested, still silent. Miya used to believe that love, if kept small enough, would never hurt. She believed that if she never asked for anything, she would never be disappointed. So she learned how to love in pieces, a glance, a borrowed pen, a shared silence. She collected those moments carefully, like someone collecting seashells, not to show anyone, but just to know they existed. As the years passed, the school felt more crowded, even though nothing had changed. More laughter in the hallways, more noise, more urgency. And yet, Miya remained still. Her love didn't fade. It deepened. It learned patience. There were days Evan would sit beside her, complaining about exams, talking about his friends, his plans. He spoke freely, not knowing every word he said settled somewhere permanent inside her. Sometimes he'd laugh at something she said, really laugh, and she'd look away quickly, afraid he might see how much that moment meant. She wondered what it would feel like to be someone Evan chose, not someone who happened to be there, but someone he looked for. That thought scared her more than loneliness ever did, so she kept quiet. One afternoon, it rained, the kind of rain that slows everything down. High school has a way of stretching time. Days felt long, years felt short. Miya watched Evan grow taller, watched his voice change, watched him become more confident, more visible. And she stayed the same, still by the window, still quiet, still loving in ways no one noticed. She learned his schedule without trying, which classes he skipped, which days he stayed late. She knew when he was sad, even when he smiled. And she knew when he was falling for someone else, long before anyone said it out loud. But that came later. For now, love was still soft, still untested, still silent. Miya used to believe that love, if kept small enough, would never hurt. She believed that if she never asked for anything, she would never be disappointed. So she learned how to love in pieces: a glance, a borrowed pen, a shared silence. She collected those moments carefully, like someone collecting seashells, not to show anyone, but just to know they existed. As the years passed, the school felt more crowded, even though nothing had changed. More laughter in the hallways, more noise, more urgency. And yet, Miya remained still. Her love didn't fade. It deepened. It learned patience. There were days Evan would sit beside her, complaining about exams, talking about his friends, his plans. He spoke freely, not knowing every word he said settled somewhere permanent inside her. Sometimes he'd laugh at something she said, really laugh, and she'd look away quickly, afraid he might see how much that moment meant. She wondered what it would feel like to be someone Evan chose, not someone who happened to be there, but someone he looked for. That thought scared her more than loneliness ever did. So she kept quiet. One afternoon, it rained, the kind of rain that slows everything down. Students crowded under the school roof, waiting for it to pass. Miya stood near the window, watching drops race each other down the glass. Evan stood beside her. They didn't speak, and somehow that silence felt heavier than words. She felt his arm brush against hers, accidentally, but not enough to pull away. Her heart beat so loudly she was sure he could hear it. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words stayed stuck in her throat. Later, she would replay that moment endlessly, not because something happened, but because nothing did. Quiet love hurts most when it almost becomes something else. As exams approached, pressure filled the air. Teachers spoke faster. Students slept less. Miya watched Evan grow tired. She noticed how his smile came slower now, how his eyes looked distant. She wanted to ask if he was okay, but she didn't, because quiet love doesn't interrupt. It waits. One day, she overheard his name, not from him, but from someone else. Someone laughing, someone excited, someone who said, "I think Evan likes her." Miya didn't ask who. She already knew. She had felt the shift weeks ago, the way he stopped sitting nearby, the way his attention moved elsewhere. Love doesn't always leave suddenly. Sometimes it just moves on without telling you. That evening, Miya walked home slowly. The sky was heavy with clouds. The street lights flickered on, one by one. She remembered every small thing she had never said, every chance she let pass. She didn't cry. She just felt tired. Tired of holding something so carefully that it never had a chance to live. She asked herself a question she had avoided for years. What if silence isn't safety? The thought frightened her, because if silence wasn't protecting her, then what was it doing? The next day, Evan smiled at her politely, not warmly, not familiarly, politely.
And that was when Maya understood something heartbreaking. You can love someone for years and still be a stranger to them. She smiled back, because that was all she knew how to do. Weeks passed. Whispers became confirmations. Evan had a girlfriend. Miya heard it without drama. No announcement, no confrontation, just a fact, settling quietly into place. She congratulated him in her head. She wished him happiness in silence. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of rain returning. She pressed her hand against her chest and finally allowed herself to feel it. Not jealousy, not anger, just loss. Loss of a story that never happened. She told me later, I didn't lose him. I lost the version of myself that believed silence was enough. And that realization hurt more than heartbreak ever could. The last year of high school arrived quietly. No one announced it. No one prepared them for how fast everything would end. One moment, they were complaining about homework, and the next, they were counting the days until goodbye. For Miya, time felt cruel. Every passing week felt like something slipping through her fingers. Evan walked the halls with a confidence that came from knowing where he was going next, university plans, future dreams. And Miya, she stayed silent, watching life move forward without her. She still sat by the window, still arrived early, but now she counted how many mornings were left. She counted them carefully, like you count something precious when you know you're about to lose it. Evan's girlfriend visited the school sometimes. She was kind, friendly, the type of person who smiled easily. Miya hated herself for noticing that. She hated herself for wishing, just once, that Evan would look at her the way he looked at someone else. But quiet love doesn't compete. It steps aside. One afternoon, their teacher asked them to write letters. Write something you want to say, even if you never give it to anyone. The classroom filled with the sound of pens moving quickly. Miya stared at her blank page. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to write honestly. Not beautifully, not carefully, just honestly. She wrote about waiting, about watching, about loving someone without being known. She wrote about Evan. She didn't say his name. She didn't need to. The page filled faster than she expected. When she finished, her hands were shaking. She folded the paper and slipped it into her bag. She told herself it was just an exercise, but deep down, she knew better. Graduation day came with bright sunlight and heavy hearts. The schoolyard was full of laughter, tears, and cameras flashing. Everyone looked so alive. Miya felt strangely distant from it all. She held her small envelope tightly. Inside was the letter she had rewritten countless times since that class. A letter she still wasn't sure she was brave enough to give. Evan stood nearby, laughing with friends. He looked happy. And in that moment, Miya realized something painful. Love isn't about being chosen. Sometimes it's about choosing not to disturb someone else's happiness. She watched him for a long time. Then she turned away. She never gave him the letter. That night, she packed her room. Old notebooks, uniforms, photos. She found the envelope again. She read the letter one last time. It said, "You matter to me more than you ever knew. I hope someone loves you loudly because I only knew how to love you quietly." She folded it carefully and placed it in a box, not to forget, but to protect herself. Life moved forward. Universities, new cities, new faces. Miya met people who liked her, people who tried to get close. But every time someone asked her how she felt, she hesitated. She had trained herself for years to be silent, and silence is hard to unlearn. Years later, she told me something that still stays with me. She said, I always thought my love story didn't matter because it never became anything, but it shaped me more than anything that ever did. She learned that love doesn't need witnesses to be real, but it does need courage, and she had run out of courage too soon. Time has a strange way of softening memories without ever erasing them. Years passed, not all at once, but quietly, the way seasons change when you're not paying attention. Miya moved to a different city for university. New streets, new classrooms, new people who didn't know who she used to be. For the first time, no one expected her to be quiet. And yet, she was. She spoke when spoken to. She smiled when required. She learned quickly, worked hard, and stayed invisible. Love appeared again, in different forms. There were boys who liked her laugh, girls who admired her kindness, people who saw her softness as something rare. But every time someone leaned closer, Miya leaned away. Not because she didn't feel anything, but because feelings scared her now. Love, to her, had become something fragile, something that could disappear if handled carelessly. She had learned to protect herself by staying silent, and silence had become familiar. One evening, during her second year of university, Miya received a message. It was from someone she hadn't thought about in years, Evan. Just a simple greeting. "How have you been?" She stared at the screen for a long time. Her heart didn't race like it used to. It didn't ache either. It just paused. She replied politely, briefly. They exchanged a few messages. Nothing emotional, nothing heavy. Before the conversation ended, he said something unexpected. "I sometimes wonder why we never talked more." That sentence stayed with her, not because of what it meant, but because of what it reminded her of. How many conversations had she imagined but never allowed to happen? That night, Miya didn't sleep. She thought about the girl she used to be, the girl by the window, the girl who believed love should stay quiet. She wondered if that girl was still inside her. After university, life became busier. Jobs, deadlines, responsibilities. Love faded into the background. Miya focused on building a life that felt safe, predictable. But sometimes, late at night, when the world finally grew quiet, memories returned. Not loudly, not painfully, just gently, like a soft knock on a door you forgot existed. One day, she met someone new. His name doesn't matter. What mattered was how different it felt. He listened, really listened. When Miya paused mid-sentence, he waited. When she hesitated, he didn't rush her. He didn't demand words. He created space for them. And slowly, very slowly, Miya began to speak. Not perfectly, not confidently, but honestly. She told him about her fears, about her habit of staying quiet, about loving without being known. And instead of pulling away, he stayed. That surprised her more than anything. One evening, sitting across from him, Miya felt something unfamiliar. Regret. Not sharp, not crushing, just clear. She realized she didn't regret loving Evan. She regretted never choosing herself. She regretted believing her feelings were too much or not enough. She regretted staying silent when her heart wanted to speak. And for the first time, she allowed herself to feel that regret without letting it define her. She once told me something else. She said, "I thought quiet love made me kind, but it also made me invisible, and love should never make you disappear." That sentence stayed with me, because it wasn't angry, it wasn't bitter, it was simply true. Miya didn't become loud. She didn't change overnight. She didn't suddenly start confessing her feelings to everyone she met, but she learned something more important. She learned to speak when it mattered, to say, "I care," to say, "I'm afraid," to say, "This hurts," to say, "Please don't leave without knowing who I am." Her voice was still soft, but it was finally hers. Sometimes love doesn't come back. Sometimes it doesn't need to. Sometimes love's purpose is to teach us who we were and who we don't want to be again. Miya still remembers Evan, not with sadness, not with longing, but with gratitude, because he was the love that taught her silence had a cost, and she was finally ready to pay it no longer. This was the love Miya never said goodbye to, and maybe it was the love that taught her how to say hello to herself.